Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. All about nutrition from your favorite dietitian. Everything you need to digest in your mind. Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. Making you healthier one bite at a time. With Tony. With Tony. Woo.
Hello and welcome to the Tips with Tony podcast. I'm Tony Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time. This next episode is all about cortisol. You probably have heard some people talk about it, whether it's myself, other nutrition professionals, health professionals, trainers, friends, coworkers. There's a lot of buzz about cortisol and stress. And so therefore, it's important for us to really take a look at what is causing your stress. But before we do that, I want to just share what cortisol actually is, what happens in the body, and hopefully you understand why stress management is so important by the end of this episode. So cortisol secretion is actually a really good thing. So it's talked about negatively in society, but it's a normal thing that happens in our bodies. And in a healthy body, the purpose of it being secreted is really to help us. It's to help to work to reduce inflammation or stress in the body. Because when our bodies feel threatened, it wants us to obviously feel safe. We are animals. We are mammals, just like any other mammal. And the only difference is that we have a very high functioning brain. So we can really get ourselves out of situations with our minds. However, if you were an animal without that, your body doesn't really know the difference between, a calorie deficit as a threat to the body versus almost getting hit by a car. Our body internalizes it the same exact way. So what happens is when our body feels threatened, basically our body will produce, it will face a stressor. So that stressor could be trauma, a threat. Honestly, it could be being attacked on social media. It could be being judged about your weight. It could be a comment if someone tells you, oh, you're not the best parent or teacher or whatever it is. Honestly, it could also just be from a very busy on-the-go life. And also it's a result of not sleeping. Your body's not going to work as efficiently as secreting that cortisol hormone. So it's really important that we pay attention to what kind of really gets us triggered and initiates what's called that fight or flight response. So when you're faced with a stressor, the hormones, a bunch of different hormones will go out and they're excreted from the top of the kidney. And basically the cortisol is what prepares that body for the fight or flight response by flooding it with glucose. Because as you guys know, glucose is an immediate energy source for the body. And if you are about to fight something and you need to protect yourself, you're going to need a whole lot of energy to fight. If you're going to flight, meaning you're going to run away because you're threatened, you also need a bunch of energy to do that. So it's our body's way to protect us. Normally, if your body wasn't feeling threatened, so for example, if you were eating a meal in a very calming environment, when we eat, cortisol is also secreted, but also with that is insulin, and that would help regulate our blood sugars and all of that, right? But the difference is that when cortisol comes out and our body feels threatened, it basically inhibits insulin production because it actually wants to prevent glucose from being stored. It wants us to use it immediately. And this is actually a really healthy thing because basically cortisol will narrow the arteries while your stress epinephrine increases your heart rate. But basically this forces the blood to pump harder and faster. But once the individual, so yourself, if you address the stress and you resolve the situation, so if you're feeling really anxious and you do some deep breathing and you recognize that you're safe and calm, then all your hormone levels will return to normal. Now, the issue is that if you are someone under repeated amounts of stress or trauma, it could be self-inflicted, or you could be in a situation where you're at a job you really can't stand, or they're overworking you, in an unhealthy relationship, battle with your body image, and you're just like always kind of beating yourself up or taking hits from other people, or unfortunately, maybe you have an illness or you've been through trauma, or honestly, just having like a very busy lifestyle and really never allowing yourself to kind of calm down, then cortisol is being pumped over and 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 again. And it never really gets to return to the normal levels, which is why stress management is so important. And I'm going to elaborate on that further. So you're probably thinking like, okay, yeah, so my body's producing a lot of cortisol. Like, what's the big deal? Well, when it's getting like produced at that kind of like constant rate, it can actually, although the intention for cortisol secretion is to help reduce inflammation in the body, over periods of time, it could actually weaken your immune function. And it also damages the interior lining of your gut. So it increases, gastrointestinal discomfort. So excessive bloating, stuff like that. It could also put you at risk for a heart attack, because what we just said is that basically the cortisol narrows the arteries while the epinephrine increases your heart rate. So your heart is being forced to work faster and harder all of the time. And that builds up the plaque in your arteries, which can eventually lead to a heart attack. Excessive cortisol levels can also be linked to irregular menstrual cycles or infertility in women. It can cause erectile dysfunction in men. And it's even been linked to insomnia, chronic fatigue syndrome, thyroid disorders, dementia, and depression. Now, the most common things you probably have heard it affects is your blood sugars, which can eventually lead to diabetes and weight gain and obesity. So earlier, you heard me talk about how what happens is cortisol is released, and then your body releases a bunch of glucose to help prevent the insulin production, to preserve that so you use it so your blood sugars never go down. They always stay elevated because your body feels like it needs glucose all of the time. That's not healthy. So that's where sometimes, diabetes could be linked to not just diet and lifestyle stuff, but it could be related to stress management. And a lot of people don't understand that, which is really important. As in regards to weight gain and obesity, what happens is your body the glucose that's being used will basically cause your body to store more visceral fat. So there's visceral fat and subcutaneous fat. Subcutaneous fat lays right under the skin. Visceral fat is really in between everything. And unfortunately, that's not the type of fat we want to have too much in our body, because it actually increases cortisol production. And as you can imagine, that's already what your body's doing. So we don't need more cortisol in the blood. So it ends up doing more harm than good. And then all of the different things that happen in stress also cause your appetites to increase, your cravings to increase as well. And like I said, storing that visceral fat. So those are all the things that can happen with excess cortisol. And so as you can see, it can really, really wreak havoc on the body if we're not managing our stress. And like I said, our body doesn't know the difference between stress and threat from, the way you talk to yourself, and stress and threats from the way other people talk to you, versus like a real life situation where hopefully you haven't had to experience real trauma, but the reality is a lot of us have. Trauma could be in an accident. It could be in, like I said, in an unhealthy relationship. There's many things that cause trauma. So the good news is, like I said, there's some tests you can get done. Actually, I don't know if I said that. How do you know if you actually have elevated cortisol or not? It's hard to really there's no real symptoms other than getting a test for it. I mean, there are symptoms, obviously, extreme fatigue, excessive cravings, unexplained weight gain, like particularly also too, I didn't say the weight gain usually happens in the belly area. That's where the visceral fat gets stored. And it can basically, obviously, you might be able to notice by those things like we talked about. So irregular menstrual cycles, infertility, your decreased immune system. But really, those can be many other things as well. So it's really hard to say that the root to those conditions are because your body is excreting too much cortisol. The only way to really know is to get a test. Now, a lot of these test kits are actually done at home. So there's saliva test, and there's also blood tests. Blood tests aren't as accurate. Saliva tests are better. However, there's also urine test, the Dutch test, where it actually measures your cortisol over a 24-hour period rather than like one specific time. So either way, with these tests, it's important to make sure that you have a medical professional reviewing them with you, so we actually know what's going on. They're kind of challenging to interpret, and even so, I think it's always best to be under the care of a physician to make sure you're reading it properly. You might be prescribed some anti-inflammation drugs, like non-steroid anti-inflammation drugs, or supplements. But it's important to note that long-term use of those can actually damage and exacerbate your inflammation, the systematic inflammation in the body. So they're only to be used temporarily. The route to cause and to heal, the route to heal all of these issues is going to go back to obviously stress management, and lifestyle changes. And that's where you'll hear a lot about like following an anti-inflammatory diet, which is really just a fancy, trendy thing that people say that you need to eat. It's really just everything that we always talk about all of the time. So it's really limiting simple sugars and making sure you're incorporating more complex carbohydrates. It's limiting things that are high in saturated fat or trans fat, like fried foods and baked goods. It's monitoring your alcohol in excess. Some people, maybe not at all, but it depends. It's really making sure that the foods that you're eating are nutrient dense. So they have a variety of micronutrients like vitamin A, vitamin C, and certain antioxidants. It's having a diet that's rich in omega-3s. So lots of things like olive oil, avocado, flax seeds, nuts and seeds. It's being mindful of even caffeine intake, only because certain people are caffeine sensitive. So, and caffeine can kind of cause that like anxious feeling in some. So being mindful of that. If you're having any gut issues, obviously it depends, but rather than going straight to probiotics like a probiotic supplement, take a look at your diet, see if there's ways that you could add probiotics in, things like kombucha, kimchi, yogurt. What else? There's so many. There's not that many, but there's a few. Kefir, even things like tempeh. Those are great sources of omega-3s. And then obviously exercise. So it's not so much diet related, but lifestyle, is, exercise is making sure, but let me reframe that. It's the type of exercise. It doesn't need to be high intensity, believe it or not. So that's where, if you have a very healthy body, stress on the body, like from exercise, is actually a good thing. But if you overtrain and now your body feels threatened, and if you're under eating significantly and you have that extreme restriction, your body is going to translate that as a threat. And so that's when it's not going to be beneficial for you. But just moving your body, things like yoga, going for a walk, a little jog, some strength training, all in moderate amounts is always going to be beneficial for you. Now, everyone's body is different. Everyone's response to things is differently. You know yourself best. I hope that I want you to feel empowered. I hope that this episode really helped you understand the importance of stress management. I hope that you will pay more attention to the things that stress you, and I hope that you take better care of you as the whole person rather than staying specifically focused on fitness or nutrition. I really, really hope that you take a look at your relationships, how you care for yourself, how you show up there for others, and are you getting that in return? If you enjoyed this episode, please take a screenshot of it, share it on your story, tag me at tips_with_Tony with an I, or the Tips with Tony podcast. If you have ideas for future episodes or you want to provide feedback of any kind, I'm always open to it. You can email me tipswithtony@gmail.com. If you haven't already written a review or gave this a 5-star rating, I would really, really appreciate it. It allows other people to find the podcast, but more importantly, when you're subscribed, it notifies you when a new episode comes out. I used to say every Monday and every Wednesday, but now every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I hope you're enjoying having me in your ear. I really, really love doing this, and I love being there for you to give you a reliable resource of nutrition information to help you sift through the confusion of everything that's out there in the world. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for listening. Thank you for trusting me. I appreciate you. As always, I'm Toni Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time.